Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Karenna Gore, and I am the founder and executive director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. I'm honored to be hosting this webinar along with all of my colleagues at the center. And I'm here just to give you a brief overview of the context of today's dialogue, and then I will introduce and turn it over to our esteemed moderator, Dr. Mary Evelyn Tucker. This dialogue is tied to the annual United Nations Climate Conference, which begins next week in Belém, Brazil. So you will see and hear it referred to as COP30, which is an acronym for Conference of the Parties. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be didactic, but I know many of us like to know what these acronyms are, and just as an offering for anybody who wants it. Conference of the Parties, parties to what? Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which in turn you may hear referred to as the UNFCCC. So all of the international multilateral work to address this global environmental issue began with an international treaty that was drafted in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 in what was referred to as the Earth Summit. The main objective was stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. It specifically calls for science, for scientific research, as well as meetings and negotiations to follow that research. The International Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, is the main body that coordinates and presents this research, notably by issuing reports. So this year, the COP returns to Brazil, and it features a new initiative from Brazilians, the Global Ethical Stocktake. So of course, the context for this is that even though we know more than we ever have about what is causing the climate change that is impacting people already, and even though we have a lot of the data and science and technology that we need to address it, we still are not doing so. And so at the level that it merits. And so this groundbreaking initiative, the Global Ethical Stocktake, was launched by President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. It is supported by the COP30 presidency, Brazil's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Brazil's Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, which is led by Minister Marina Silva. And I want to just make a note about the leadership role of Minister Marina Silva. She is a visionary and compelling leader, and I've heard many people credit her publicly with this idea for the Global Ethical Stocktake. In any event, she certainly is the leader officially of that circle within the Brazilian COP leadership, and she has been very much focused on framing and convening it. So why is the Global Ethical Stocktake groundbreaking? It is inspired by something called the Global Stocktake that was written into the Paris Agreement of 2015 at COP21. And the Global Stocktake was focused on tracking progress of the commitments that were made in mitigation and adaptation and finance in a way that is very important and also rather technical. The Global Ethical Stocktake has a different focus. It's on the drivers of human perception and behavior. It recognizes it's not the earth that needs fixing, it's actually human societies that need to be addressed. And it centers culture. It brings together social, cultural, spiritual, business, scientific, and political leaders through 6 regional dialogues, as well as self-organized dialogues, some of which focus specifically on poignant issues. And it aims to deliver a set of civil society contributions to COP30 that can truly help us break through. So there are 5 questions that the Global Ethical Stocktake seeks answers to. Our moderator will say more about which ones we focus on today. For my part, I will just say that the essential underlying inquiry of this initiative as stated on the official website of the Brazilian team, is if we know what needs to be done to tackle the climate crisis, why are we not doing it? And I should say, I speak to you as somebody who was asked by Minister Marina Silva specifically to support the Global Ethical Stocktake as a co-leader for the North America region. It's a great honor of mine. And this particular group here represents people that I have so much deep respect for and a real desire to carry words and messages to Brazil next week. I know others here will be going, I will be going. And so one more thing to say from me, which is that we've all heard the call that the main thing to do to address the climate crisis is to listen to the scientists and to follow the science. We've also heard it said that this is a spiritual crisis, that what's happening to our climate and what we do about it is really about much more than data or science or technology, as important as they may be, that it is a matter of spirituality. So how do these two things connect? Today, we have absolutely leading, inspiring, and phenomenal voices to help us think about this. And leading the way is someone I'm proud to call a mentor, as well as a colleague and a friend. Dr. Mary Evelyn Tucker is the co-founder and co-director of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology with her husband, John Allen Grimm. They taught for decades in the Joint Master's Program in Religion and Ecology at Yale, between the School of the Environment and the Divinity School. She has been called a true pioneer, and I would even say she should be called the godmother of the field of religion and ecology. She has authored and edited around 20 volumes of books and hundreds of articles. Many are very specifically on the topic that we will address today, including those featuring her teacher, the phenomenal, iconic Thomas Berry, and also the extraordinary body of work that is in The Journey of the Universe. And so, without further ado, I turn it over with great admiration and gratitude to Mary Evelyn Tucker.
Thank you so much, Corinna, and thank you for your work, which is also amazing in the field of religion and ecology, as well as ethics and law, etc. And we're so delighted to be working closely with you and co-sponsoring this. I want to begin with picking up, of course, the sense of urgency that we all feel. Michael Mann wrote a very important short piece this morning that Gus Best sent around saying, this is so urgent, systems are unraveling, humans are suffering, that we know. And I want to bring that level of urgency to a quote from the president of this COP, Andre Correa. He says in his most recent letter about this COP, he says, the wealthy insulate themselves behind climate resilient walls while the poor are left exposed. Such a future must be rejected outright. It is unethical, immoral, and ultimately self-destructive, for it corrodes the very cooperation that has made human evolution possible. And he is saying adaptation, which is a huge part of climate response to climate change, is the next step in human evolution. So he's putting it on a level that's almost unprecedented. What does this really mean for humans to be humans and to evolve for mutually enhancing human-Earth relations? Now, I want to begin, we could have a whole seminar just on science and spirituality. We've got terrific experts here, including Ursula Goodenough and Steve Combs. But I want to begin with the very famous quote of Einstein, which is saying, science without religion is lame, but religion without science is blind. I think we can all understand this. And yet, it's been a difficult journey, as we know, to bring together multiple ways of knowing. Science clearly leads the way on climate change and our understanding of it. But the spiritual, the moral, the ethical needs to be infused with, bonded with the policy and science and law that are driving climate responses. Now, In preparing for this, I realized that the IPCC workshops in 2026 are actually going to respond to this because they are focused on looking at diverse knowledge systems, which includes science, but also indigenous, local, and practitioner knowledge. This is a big switch, and it's very exciting. The traditional environmental knowledge will be included. So the knowledge is one thing. The other is the moral force for change. I went to college in Washington, D.C. at the women's part of Georgetown because I wanted to be involved in civil rights and the anti-Vietnam War movement. And when I saw Martin Luther King and Jesse Jackson and John Lewis and so many others speaking out with this moral voice that still resonates in our society and around the world, I was deeply moved. And I felt when I traveled through Asia, realizing China and India and its modernization processes would be affecting the whole planet, this is why we started the Harvard conferences, because we said, where's the moral force from all of the spiritual religious traditions around the world for environmental care, preservation, and, if you will, appropriate use? Now, that's where we are right now, because we need to engender, lift up a new sense of respect between scientists and spiritual spokespersons. Academia has kept them separate. You know, we've got our great School of the Environment that Gus Speth led for many years, and we've got a wonderful divinity school. But the divinity school is people. The School of the Environment is planet. Excellent. But until Gus created this joint program almost 20 years ago, that dialogue hadn't happened. And it's going forward with that dialogue that we need to do. And I want to say, I'm citing Gus because he's been such a great leader, Gus Speth, because he had this notion we have the science, we don't have the spiritual moral transformation. That's why he brought us to Yale and set up that joint program. But if we say, we have the science. IPCC reports have been going on since 1988. It's the largest scientific project in human history, led by natural science, but complemented by social science. It's an extraordinary achievement. Seven programs and reports have come out of it, and so on. But the policy, it has to be policy relevant and not prescriptive. That's part of the boundaries and so on. So how are we going to get this holistic perspective with the implications for humans, life systems, and all future generations? We need, as Gus and others are saying, not just climate, a response to climate change, but systems change. We need to take into account the economic and social perspectives, because this is the greatest challenge humans have ever faced. So we have the science, we have policy, we have the World Resources Institute, which Gus founded, we have the World Watch Institute with State of the World reports for many years. But policy was analysis of facts, but it didn't always go specifically to values and prescriptions. And that, again, is part of this missing link. We have law. Natural Resources Defense Council led the way in environmental law. We have earth justice and so on. But again, we have to deepen the moral force here. We clearly have the technology. Alternative energies is rising to scale, solar, EV cars, etc. And we even have ecological economics. But the moral compass and the ethical will for change remains elusive and yet on the horizon, because people realize something is missing. We have all of this, the science, the policy, the law, the ecological and technical potential to make this shift for climate change and response to other environmental problems like biodiversity loss and pollution. So I'm going to conclude with one of the positive signs as we take up these questions here. Why do we deny or ignore what both science and other ways of knowing teach us about the climate crisis? We have to ask this over and over again, but how can we learn from spiritual traditions and practices to live in balance with nature? That's the challenge. That's what many groups have been trying to do. The Forum on Religion and Ecology, creating a new field of study with 30 30 graduate programs now. And the moral force that many of you have been working on. We have Green Faith and Interfaith Power and Light and many, many groups like this. But here's one important contribution that has changed the conversation. And that is 10 years ago when Laudato Si came out with Pope Francis's bringing together the science with the policy and values, with a sense of people and planet. That gap began to close. And it is, Bill McKibben considers that document the most important document of the 21st century, Laudato Si, care for our common home. And let me conclude, why is that? Because Leonardo Boff, leading liberation theologian from Brazil, Latin America, working with other liberation theologians, when Thomas Berry said to him, we can't liberate people without the integrity of ecological systems. So the well-being of people and planet are clearly linked. And his book in 1997, Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor, was a landmark book in this joining together people and planet, science, and other ways of knowing. And that is the core, in many ways, of Laudato Si. So we have some very promising things to draw on, religious leaders who've been leading the way, the Greek Orthodox Patriarch, the Dalai Lama, and others, all of whom are linking science with values, science and spirituality. So let me say then that we are launching into this, beginning with traditional environmental knowledge, beginning with Lila June Johnson. And I will introduce each of these speakers as they come up. Lila is one of the most important emerging young and yet old soul spokespersons for Indigenous peoples. She is an orator, she's a musician, she's a poet, she's a storyteller. Her CV and so on will be in the chat. But what I love about Lila is that she herself combines all the knowledge and learning that she did at Stanford and her PhD and so on with a sense we have to learn in multiple ways. So I invite you to look later at her TED Talk. Her PhD is on food and indigenous land management and the excavation of hidden history. We'd like to welcome as our first speaker and dear friend, Lila June. Thank you, Lila.
Yat eishik arashidene she nanisht ejitachitin shle do tsas bashishin ashin hedishatedo bilagana edishanale akut ego and hokadi and dene asan shle. So I'm so happy to be here. I'm from the Nanisht Ejitachitni clan of the Dene Nation. We are also incorrectly known as Navajo. We are indigenous to what is now called New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah, but we call it Denebakea, the people's land. We live within 4 sacred mountains that we call home in that region. I'm really honored to be here with all of you. I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation. And I want to respond with 2 things. Number one is one reason we haven't made the concerted action on climate is also due to the oppression of corporations and what my people call coyote spirit. So I think humans are naturally very hard on themselves, naturally very guilty conscience about everything. And we have to also remember we're under extreme pressures. Not to say that those pressures will stop us, and not to say that it gives us a cop out to do nothing, but just to say that, you know, we are very heavily under multi-billion-dollar corporation propaganda machines and policy control. And I think if it was left up to the people, we would have a very different world by now. But we are constantly held in gridlocks by the powers that be, if you will. So I just wanted to mention that we're not just all bad and, you know, doing terrible job, that we're also operating in a very tough political, economic, social situation that just stacks the cards against us every day, so to just give ourselves a little break, that we're trying really hard. And I think Mamdani's victory yesterday was an inspiring glimmer of hope that we can overcome the 26 billionaires that tried to defeat him and couldn't. So we can overcome these interests. Secondly, what I wanted to say is I wanted to answer your question with a story. So when I was doing my PhD, I was looking at all these different native land management techniques. I was looking at ancient clam gardens in the Pacific Northwest that are 3,000, almost 3,000 years old. I was looking at the chestnut groves that used to grow from Maine down to Georgia and were curated and maintained by indigenous peoples. I was looking at 11,000-year-old abalone farms of the Chumash in the Channel Islands of what we now call Malibu, California. I was looking at the oyster fisheries in the Chesapeake Bay, and I was so enamored by how indigenous peoples were creating these systems of abundance, and that we weren't hunter-gatherers after all, but we were actually cultivators of the land's natural food-bearing capacity. And we weren't wandering around looking for a berry to eat or a deer to hunt, but that we were in fact gardening the earth on large scales. And I was just so interested in how we did it. And then I did a thought experiment. About 4 years into my study, I had been obsessing over how big is the clam garden? What kind of materials are they made of? How does it work? What are the mechanics of it? That scientific thing that you're talking about, Corinna and Mary Evelyn, of just the hard science of it. And then I realized, what if we gave this clam garden to a capitalist?
Mhm.
Exact same technology, exact same strategy. Would it have lasted almost 3,000 years uninterrupted? Probably not, right? And that's the moment I realized it's not just how we do things that matters, it's why we do things. Because the indigenous ethic and the spiritual call that they were called to was to build clam gardens for the benefit of all life, because it wasn't just humans feeding on these clams, and for the benefit of future generations. That makes the clam garden different than if you're building the clam garden to reap profits for short-term gain and happily loot the future for immediate comfort. And that ethic, that switch between being takers to givers, not just across space but throughout time, made me realize that that is the secret sauce of indigenous food systems. Not how they did it per se, although that is interesting, it does matter, but why they did it. And that I realize is sort of, you know, nodding to what you and Corinna are saying, is that technology alone will not save us. In fact, unless we garden our values and landscape our inner world, we will never begin to be able to landscape our outer world properly. And it is actually the invisible world of the human heart that is the rudder to guide the ship of all of the visible things that we see. And I think we often forget that, being such visual creatures, we like to measure stuff and radiocarbon date stuff and try to, understand the physicality of it all, when really it's the invisible world of our hearts that is where the most consequential things exist. And so I think that's what we're doing with the global ethical stocktake, is like, okay, what is our heart saying? And until we get that right, there is no technology that will save us. We'll just keep running our heads against the wall. So thank you, Mary Evelyn, for having me here with you all. I look forward to hearing the other speakers as well.
Thank you, Lila June. Such a pleasure to hear you always. And next, we'll have Ursula Goodenough. And Ursula is also a very special friend for many, many years, helped us deeply with Journey of the Universe. She has all kinds of academic credentials, including being an elected member of the National Academy of Science and getting degrees from Barnard and from Columbia and from Harvard. and teaching for many years as professor of biology at Washington University, one of our great universities, and teaching there also a course with a physicist on the epoch of evolution, which is unique, I think, and having students write in their journals about it. And just as I introduce her, I want to highlight her book, Sacred Depths of Nature. And here's what Robin Kimmerer said about this beautiful book, Sacred Depths of Nature. At once expansive and intimate, empirical and immanent, analytical and intuitive, material and spiritual, science and poetry get to dance joyfully together in these pages. That's what we're doing on this webinar, and Sacred Depths of Nature does it in the writing in a beautiful way. Ursula, welcome.
Thanks, Mary Evelyn. I love you so much, and wonderful to be with all these other people whom I don't know, but hope that will change. Um, so in phone conversations, Mary Evelyn suggested that I talk about values. What do we mean by values? So I have uh, improved on that a bit, and here goes. So where do our values come from? Aristotle tells us the following. We have our values neither by nor contrary to our nature. We are fitted by our nature to receive them. Love that. So the keystone feature of our nature in this context is that we are a symbolic species and we communicate and think in stories. Hence, we receive our values from the stories we tell to one another and are fitted to receive. Throughout human history, our value-laden stories, our large stories, have come to us through religious traditions, be they sung around campfires or preached from a pulpit or a bema. The stories usually include the concept of a god or gods or ancestors or shamans, and they tell us what is valued and hence rewarded, and what is wrong and hence punished in a given cultural context. The traditions have yielded a collection of beautiful and meaningful large stories that grace human history. Recently, we have been blessed by another large story, what some of us call everybody's story, or the Tucker Grimm folks call it the universe story, lots of names. Anyway, a story that has come to us via our science-based understandings of the natural world. The Big Bang, stars, planet Earth, origin of life, evolution of life, Earth-life integration in dynamic ecosystems, and the very, very recent advent of human beings. Some people include some kind of new supernatural presence in everybody's story, but many, including me, do not. Regardless, we are all gobsmacked by what's out there and inside us, and how we came to be, and how beautiful it all is. We experience awe and wonder. We take these understandings of nature to mind, with their truth continuously being verified by the technologies that they spawn. To know and to honor this story is what I would say is to be a naturalist. Everybody's story tells us that all earthly beings are interrelated. We share a common ancestor, the first earthly life, who emerged some 4 billion years ago and evolved into countless manifestations of being an organism, a self. And it tells us that we are all interdependent, dependent on one another and on our waters and soils and atmospheres and oceans and stars for the lives we are blessed to have. Hence, it tells us that the natural world is of primary value, and hence it is sacred and calls for celebration. The sacredness of the natural world is, of course, central to indigenous and pagan and Asian traditions, and can be found as well throughout the Abrahamic traditions. Those of us who call ourselves religious naturalists or eco-spiritual join their voices. Our t-shirt meme reads that we take nature to heart. We access our spiritual sensibilities in the presence of everybody's story and the natural world that surrounds us. In those contexts, we experience reverence, gratitude, humility, and the joy of being alive at all in all this wondrousness. To the extent that we value the natural world, including its human beings and their cultures, so do we take responsibility for protecting its ability to flourish. And we experience outrage when that ability is thwarted, as we are now seeing in the presence of climate change. Importantly, and lastly, the spiritual and moral responses developed in religious naturalist orientations usually deeply overlap those cherished by the existing traditions and practices. The adoption of everybody's story does not alter the human impulse toward common spiritual sensibilities and moral values. To go back to Aristotle, we are fitted by our nature to receive them. Rather, the adoption of a story influences how we get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that's written down so we can also read it later. That's absolutely marvelous. And Ursula founded with some others this wonderful Religious Naturalists Association, which has this terrific website. So thank you, Ursula. And next, we will go to Melanie. Melanie, also, I'm delighted to call a friend and a cherished colleague in the area of religion and ecology. And she is professor of Black feminist thought and womanist theology at the Wake Forest School of Divinity and the African American Studies program at Wake Forest University, so a joint program. She's also director of the Food, Health, and Ecological Well-Being Program. And it's amazing how food is becoming so important for so many reasons. I love her book, Eco-Womanism, Earth Honoring Faith, which Orbis did. And she has a brand new book, which she's going to introduce, that we're going to celebrate at the American Academy of Religion. But I also want to mention that Melanie has background as a broadcast journalist, and she worked as a news producer on ABC, CBS, and NBC. So we're delighted to welcome you and also to note that your degrees, MA and PhD, are from Union. And so we're thrilled to have you back at Union and on this program. Thank you, Melanie. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mary Evelyn, and special thanks to Corinna Gore for this beautiful, beautiful conversation. I'm grateful to each of the panelists and for all of us who are gathered here for this important conversation. I'm going to lean into a little bit of sharing of my screen here just as we get started. And as we do so, I want to invite you into a wonderful moment of meditation. This is something that many of our traditions do quite easily. So won't you invite yourself, your own inner self, your own ancestral self, to be with us in a bit of song. Breathing in this time and this moment together, we give thanks indeed, for we are some voices gathered for this conversation on spirituality and science, earth, religion, and ecology. But the spaces between our hearts, which are already webbed, also have other voices connected to them. I have the gift and honor of sharing the perspective of eco-womanism, which Mary Evelyn just mentioned, eco-womanism really is an approach to environmental justice that centers the religious and spiritual and moral perspectives on the experiences of Indigenous women, women of color, and especially women of African descent. We recognize that the eco-womanist approach really does demand an intersectional analysis linking earth justice with social justice issues. One of the gifts, I think, of eco-womanism, particularly for this conversation, is the fact that we really do lift up different ethical systems and deepen those ethical values that have already been so beautifully shared in our panel so far. The values of interconnection, the values of being connected with one another and certainly with Earth. It creates a kind of understanding, an ethical mandate, so to speak, to be able to approach our relationship with Earth differently than one might assume from a settler kind of perspective or a colonial frame or a capitalist agenda. Some of the mothers of this work in eco-womanism include the work of Wangari Maathai, Alice Walker, Leah Thomas. It is these theorists and voices and artists who really do, and scientists who really do encourage us to start thinking through a different kind of cosmology. Eco-womanism is going to be born out of many cosmologies, African in nature, whereby there is a deep connection between the human realm, the spiritual realm, and the natural realm. The circle, the web of life that flows within all these creates a kind of system of ethics, a system of accountability, that if one is to anger a river, one may see the manifestation in the disruption in another relationship, a human-to-human relationship, perhaps. In the important work of creating mutually enhancing relationship, these African American cosmology and many indigenous cosmologies suggest a different kind of ethic, a relational ethic, a way of being. There are 7 simple steps to the eco-womanist method, which are very important to share and usually can be used as a way of opening up conversation, particularly around disciplines that may not speak on a regular basis, such as science and spirituality, ecology. Honoring experience is the first step, and this will be very common for any of us working in liberative thought, liberation theology, etc. But it is the gift of storytelling, and actually not just storytelling, but the art of deep listening. We hear again the echo of Thich Nhat Hanh in Buddhism and so many others who cultivate the work of compassion through the listening ear. This becomes very important for first world countries, those who create a lot of the climate reality that we are living with. Be able to step back and to hear the voices of those who are most impacted by climate change. The creation of a listening story, but also a listening ear, creates a first step towards reflecting on the experience of interconnectedness, noticing that the earth is sacred, honoring the wisdom, particularly climate solutions that emerge from Indigenous, Black, and communities of color globally. The third step of the eco-womanist method invites intersectional, or what we could call womanist social analysis. It is going to point, indeed, to the fact that there is a universal story that all of the human family experiences, that all earthlings experience, but it is going to press that there are particularities to the experience of racism. There are particularities to the experience of sexism. There are particularities to the experience of classism that many human beings experience different from others. That the logic of domination, the creeping of colonial thought in frames into any of the work around justice ought not be, that we have to be very careful about uplifting any of those frames and taking them out. And the way to do that is to come in with an eye towards looking at the intersections between race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and environmental belonging. The fourth step of the eco-womanist method suggests that we have the right to change and to critically explore our traditions. Often in African and African American religious work, this involves going back into the text, the sacred songs, and asking hard questions about whether dualisms exist. I am a poor pilgrim of sorrow. I walk through this poor land alone. I have no hope for tomorrow. I want to make heaven my home. This spiritual, the pilgrim song, really does create an extraordinary musical tradition. It really looks at African American musical tradition, but if we critically explore it, we recognize that there is a deep, deep dualism. It is based on the survival strategies of enslaved Africans trying so hard to understand the violence, the brutal slavery that they are experiencing, and wanting very much to leave Earth in order to be in heaven. With that song and that step of critically exploring, we are pressed to look at the fact that many Indigenous, Black, African experiences with the environment are in fact different than all of us together. And being able to web out environmental justice, taking those songs, those voices, those stories seriously is an important step. Moving into step 5, engaging the kind of transformation that may in fact be necessary for us to come up with climate solutions together. The sharing of dialogue in step 6 indeed it creates an opportunity for us to do that work, sharing dialogue together. It honors the fact that we are, as a movement and as a work and environmental justice keepers, interreligious and interfaith. There are a variety of different perspectives across the African diaspora, but a variety of religious and cultural and spiritual traditions across the environmental movement. To be able to speak together with a common open heart becomes very important work, such that a theorist and a scholar must move into a deep space of listening and humility. The 7th step of the eco-womanist method really does encourage us to take action to justice by really taking a look at what does it mean to look at our work differently as we protest the logic of domination in all of its forms, and really look at the anthropocentric attitudes that we in our communities hold. In my new book, Preaching Black Earth, these conversations are lifted up. It is important to recognize that this book is not just a sermon book, but it is actually a book that includes sermons, meditations, and conversations on African American environmental justice and eco-womanist spirituality. It makes some recommendations that may be helpful for the conversation today around climate, gender, and poverty. It does suggest that integrating Indigenous knowledge and Black women's wisdom is central if we are to come up with climate solutions. It creates opportunities for us to incorporate gender analysis when really trying to look at how climate change is impacting women, men, and gender diverse peoples across the world. We ask the question, indeed, about economic injustice and poverty, and it pushes us to start building moral economies by cultivating what Cynthia Molabita calls systemic change towards more equitable, ecological, and moral economies that link our everyday moral spiritual lives to the ethical, meaning-making work of earth-honoring faiths. I'll conclude by sharing the ecowomanistcircle.org website, which is a new website on a nonprofit organization that many eco-womanists are beginning to find very useful and helpful. It really outlines our mission and our goal to look at research, climate justice, leadership, and the environment. It is indeed an invitation for all of us to look again at our values and to practice them together.
Thank you so much, Melanie. It's beautiful. And I just love when you sing. It just brings us all into the heart and the smile lights up our face. So beautiful. Thank you. Can't wait to see you at the American Academy of Religion to celebrate your book and you. Now we move to another wonderful woman. I love having so many women here. Marian Villela. I feel I've known you for decades because you have devoted yourself to decades of work as at the Secretariat for Earth Charter International. And you've been the executive director, but much, much more because you have a vision. You come originally from Brazil, you know Latin America so well, you're internationally beloved, just celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Earth Charter in Holland with many, many dear friends from Europe and around the world, many youth. And you have also really worked hard with the Earth Charter in the Center there for Education for Sustainable Development at the University for Peace, which was established by the UN some years ago, Robert Mueller and others. So you have degrees like all of us here, a PhD from LaSalle and a master's from the Kennedy School at Harvard. But I would say your degree is in bringing forward the finest global ethic we have that as we work together with you for many, many years in the drafting of it, but it brings together, doesn't it, this profound respect for universe and earth and our place in it, but ecological integrity, social economic justice, democracy, nonviolence, and peace. So I recommend it to all here and all around the world as the key global ethics for our time. Thank you for being with us, Miriam, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Mary Evelyn, and for everyone who are joining here today, both as participants and as speakers. It's an honor for me, and warm greetings from Costa Rica, where I am today. So, in order to contribute to this conversation that I understand is focusing on one of the 5 questions that the Global Ethical Stocktake issued to us, which, by the way, when I first heard of the Global Ethical Stocktake back in March, through I think the first letter from the president of COP30, I thought, this is quite unique. It's the first time that in a COP they're really opening the space and making ethics so central to this, and not only from within intergovernmental negotiations, but also inviting people from all over the world to engage in it and contribute to this process, which I think is not going to end here, but I think it's really historical because normally COPs have been focusing on finance, technical issue, climate change adaptation, mitigation, but there hasn't been this space for addressing could ethics be the missing link, for instance, right? So one of the questions is why are we keeping to ignore science and traditional knowledge and not really make things happen? So let me start by saying that my brief reflection and answer to this don't come just from me, but from the influence I have been receiving from 39 submissions, so more or less 39 submissions we received over the past couple of weeks from the Earth Charter Network for our call on building on the call of COP30 on self-organized dialogues related to the Global Ethical Stocktake. And I was just calculating this morning, and it seems that it involved about 1,000 people, the voices and insights of 1,000 people through this ethical stocktake. So on the question, why we still don't do what we should be doing, let me share 4 points. The first one, and I have seen that also through a lot of our conversations on Global Ethical Stocktake and the Earth Charter process, worldviews. There's an issue of predominant worldviews and mindsets. Predominant worldviews and mindsets that are fragmented and have become disconnected, meaning worldviews that lack to see our deep sense of interconnectedness and see Earth and life as sacred. We just heard from Melanie Harris who shared also a point of interconnectedness and Earth, seeing Earth and life as sacred. So we also have seen this emerge from our conversations within the Earth Charter network. And is also articulated clearly in the Earth Charter, the notion of interconnectedness and seeing life and as sacred. So we tend to see ourselves separate from, I mean, predominantly the modern culture, seeing ourselves from separate from nature rather than part of this interdependent whole. And this could be one of the points regarding our predominant worldviews. This lack of integral perspective that is limiting our understanding on the deep connection between ecology, the social and spiritual dimension of life. The second point has to do with blindness, I would say. Blindness that is also rooted on the lack of ecological, ethical, and systemic literacy. We have been saying this for a couple of years, that there is a lack of ecological, ethical, and systemic literacy in all of us, especially through education. So our formal education process and experience often fails to nurture the awareness, the sense of empathy, the sense of responsibility with the well-being of all. Our formal education processes are lacking to nurture or cultivate this needed sense of care and for the Earth community, awareness that we belong to an Earth community. So without this sense of responsibility and ethic of care, it becomes much easier to turn the back or turn away from the truth, right? The challenge here then is to cultivate this sense of mindset and address our generalized blindness regarding a sense of interconnectedness, respect for life, and shared responsibility. As also articulated in the Earth Charter, there is one point that has to do with blindness, has to do with deep sense of responsibility. As articulated in Rio 92, the Rio Declaration, and also in the Earth Charter, responsibility involves universal responsibility, but also a sense of common but differentiated responsibility, right? In principle 2B of the Earth Charter, it's clearly articulated that sense of responsibility also with how am I affecting someone on the other side of the world and how I can care for that. So second point is blindness with regards to our sense of responsibility and care. Third, powerful interests. I've been in several conversations regarding this, and basically people are saying, well, there are two strong, powerful interests that are holding this great transition or change. The transition to sustainable models of production and consumption are resisted by powerful interests that are too strong. This I have also seen in some of our conversation. Lastly, that has to do with what I said at the beginning, involves maybe due to a lack of ethical, ecological literacy, awareness, or consciousness. I have just read in the chat box here, I think Aimer wrote on the chat box addressing, well, maybe it's an issue of addressing our consciousness. So from a Earth Charter point of view, one of the key purposes of the Earth Charter has been to deepen and expand our consciousness with regards to how we ought to relate to one another as humans, but also with the large living world. So these are the 4 points that I wanted to briefly share with regards to why we don't do what we should do, involving lack of awareness, consciousness, and ecological, ethical literacy.
Wonderful, Miriam. And your experience really shows because you've been to so many conferences, convened so many educational classes and resources. And may the University of Peace in Costa Rica continue to nurture you as you have nurtured so many, especially in the next generation. Very, very grateful and for all that you're doing and with UNESCO as well. Thank you. Now, We are thrilled to have a newer friend, but very dear colleague, I would say, Steve Combs, join us. And Steve really represents this quite extraordinary synthesis in his life work and his personhood of science and spirituality, or ecology and ethics. And he edits Environment, the 70-year-old magazine, Environment, Science and Policy for Sustainable Development. I'm going to read the paragraph that describes this magazine, because this is what we need to bring these different ways of knowing together. And Steve, as a scientist with his other editorial colleagues, is doing this. Environment, now in its seventh decade of publication, analyzes environmental and policy challenges with peer-reviewed articles and commentaries from highly respected researchers and practitioners who provide a broad range of international perspectives and offer appropriate actions at local and global levels. Written to be accessible to broad audiences, Environment breaks down the silos between academic disciplines and between academia and practice. Everything we're aiming for in this discussion and beyond. Now, Steve taught for many, many years at the University of Portland, where he had a chair in science at the University of Portland, and he has degrees in zoology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. But his interests are in the area of salmon recovery planning, combining ethical and scientific analysis in environmental policy discussions, including in water and air quality, and the effects of pesticides. One of the things I especially love is that he's on the steering committee for the Columbia River Pastoral Letter of Bishops, and it's the Columbia River watershed, caring for creation and the common good. And he's been doing that for many, many years. And finally, he taught, as he said, for some decades, actually, a course at the University of Portland on theology in ecological perspective with a theologian. So that's a marvelous set of experiences. And Steve, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Mary Evelyn. I'll just jump right in. Climate change is a dilemma, and it's a dilemma that we need to find our way out of. And there's two main components to finding your way away from a dilemma. You need to understand where you are, and you need to understand the direction you want to move in. So essentially, you need a map that shows your present location. And you need to know the terrain around you. Where is it steep? Where is it gentle? And you need to know the direction to go. I view scientists essentially as cartographers of the world. We carry out measurements of CO2 or methane or water chemistry at different depths, or changes in biodiversity. We carry out experiments in the lab to understand how physical processes are working. We create and test mathematical models that help us develop current maps, and sometimes we can manage possible future maps that show us how things might be. We mark locations, terrain, and routes. But it's really important to realize what we don't do. Using the scientific method does not make us compass makers. You don't just need a map, you have to have a compass. Compasses point to destinations. They provide the why and the where to of finding our way out of this dilemma. There are compass makers and compass users, and we call them things that include philosophers, theologians, ethicists. They're the ones that are qualified to use and using the compasses. Most of this panel are compass makers and users. So then the question is, why do we ignore what both science and other ways of knowing teach us about the climate crisis. Using the vocabulary I think the answer is actually quite simple. There's pushback from very powerful vested interests. They want to resist movement in a direction that would promote overall human well-being, like protection of the vulnerable or common access to necessary resources or environmental justice. If you attack the maps and the map makers, it sounds less obviously like greed or being basically a terrible person than attacking the compass users. And so they attack the map. Because if you attack the compass, if you attack the moral and ethical compass, you sound just terrible. No one wants to sound that terrible. So they go after the science. Now, recently, to my surprise, or perhaps my shock, there has even been talk criticizing empathy itself. There have been discussions of toxic empathy. And that stunned me when I saw it, because it's the first time that the compass makers, the compass users, have ever been attacked. But even in our really polarized world, that sounds pretty terrible to most people. And it's not going to gain much traction. It sounds much less horrible about yourself to say the science is wrong than it sounds when you say caring for others is wrong. So in my opinion, that is where the resistance comes from.
Do you want to say anything going forward, though, on the, well, maybe this is our first question. Let me thank you for so clearly articulating the opposition. And I just wonder if I could draw you out, Steve, on an example, anything, but even the Columbia River working with bishops and scientists is an example of the other perspective. Would you like to raise that up for our consideration?
I'll mention two things. One is I was very fortunate when I moved out to the University of Portland 30 years ago or so to get on the Pastoral Letter Steering Committee, the Columbia River Pastoral Letter Steering Committee. And I got to spend some years traveling around the Pacific Northwest with a group of Catholic bishops, because it is a Catholic university. And it turns out there's nowhere Catholic bishops can't go if they ask for it. And so I've been on the backside of the Hanford site, where the little stream coming out of the sandbank is tritiated, and it's not safe to drink water or chew gum or smoke cigarettes. And I've been in the bunkers where they were storing the nerve agents at the military facility near there. And I've been to beautiful, pristine wilderness that's been protected. And my chance to work and hear the bishop's reflections on what was around us, but even more than that, they held listening sessions in all these places. And they just arranged for people to be invited to come and say what these regions, what these places, what their lives meant to them. That was what gave me my perspective on the Pacific Northwest. And then I'll say one other thing. I think of the example of Rupert Reed and Liam Kavanagh in the United Kingdom, who've co-founded the Climate Majority Project, in which they've recruited people of all possible political persuasions to join together to try to fight climate change because it is a dilemma for all of us. And so I think of that example and think they're bringing together people with every possible belief. You know, the wonderful thing about these compasses, these moral compasses, is with some small variations, no matter which one it is, they all point in the same direction. And so you can have a lot of different kinds of beliefs and still see a common way out of this problem if you work together.
Mm-hmm. That's tremendous. And I know John Hart, the environmental ethicist, has also worked on this Columbia letter. And so an ethicist, again, and a scientist, this combination is extraordinary. We really must highlight this somehow and put it maybe on the forum site because it's such a great example. Before we continue with some questions, are there any questions of panelists to one another of anything that was said, considered? And if not, we can jump into other reflections. I'm going to go over to Lila June and maybe give some examples from your perspective on food or things that you worked on in your dissertation is up on your website as well, or any example you want to give that illustrates this multiple ways of knowing coming together in an effective way.
Sure. Well, I mean, I could go forever on this, so I'll try to limit myself. But uh, the first thing that always comes to mind is the chestnut trees. We used to think the chestnut groves that grew from Maine to Georgia were naturally occurring or randomly occurring. But we now know by looking at fossilized pollen evidence that these groves were actually planted by humans, uh, augmented by humans, spread by humans, and maintained by humans. Specifically, one pond in Kentucky shows that the chestnut trees were instituted around 3,000 years ago in the abundance that we see that we see in the record. And we see that they also did polyculture. They intermixed these chestnut trees with hickory nut and black walnut, as well as smaller edible species like sumpweed, which is a domesticated edible plant species. So it's not really a weed actually, but goosefoot, as well as sunflower, edible sunflowers. So the fossilized pollen record doesn't lie. It shows us how vegetation changes over time, and that this polyculture food forest that was created out of thin air 3,000 years ago um, was maintained also for 3,000 years straight. And I think that's not to say indigenous peoples are perfect or we're just perfect societies or anything like that, because I'm sure during that time the people were learning, the people were making mistakes, the people were getting back on their feet after issues, and we know that through some of our mistakes we learned how to be egalitarian. We learned how to sustain things. Some of the books that are written about indigenous peoples that are very influential and very inaccurate, unfortunately, such as Jared Diamond's book Collapse or his book Guns, Germs, and Steel. Like those two books just are so horrendously misframing things in the sense that, yes, many indigenous groups experienced collapse. Many did not, but many did. And those are the ones that get the headlines, right? But it was in the ashes of that collapse that indigenous peoples rose up to be more sustainable, more egalitarian. So, for example, in Chaco Canyon, which is my ancestral city, which is a very famous city, famous archaeological site, we started to have caste systems. We started to have enslave each other. This is before Columbus was ever born, and that our city peaked in the year 1100. And then it collapsed. But it was through that collapse which was engendered by a drought that the Creator sent to us. It was a gift. The drought was a gift because it gave us the courage to change when nothing else would. And also coinciding with that time in 1100 when it collapsed, the youth rose up too, and they said, no more. This is our oral stories, all kinds of amazing stories that our people still carry. And when everything went into a heap of ashes, we realized that hierarchy does not work, and hierarchy does not belong on this planet. Creator made this world to be diverse. Creator made this world to be equal, not only equal, but synergizing, working together, collaborating. Um, and that, yes, some animals eat animals, but that's more of a cycle of necessity than a cycle of greed and unnecessary destruction. And that creator made this world to be just, believe it or not. I know it doesn't seem like it sometimes, but all of these unjust systems, they always collapse. And so it was through veering off the path, veering off the path of righteousness, veering off the path of equality, veering off the path of kindness, that our civilizations got burned. And now, if you look at my people, we are completely egalitarian. All of our clans are equal, the clans that I stated at the beginning. You'll never hear a Dene person say Hanagatni clan is more important than Torachitni clan, or is more important than Kiaani clan, or is more important than Ashihe clan. All the clans are understood to be equal, and all of the clans are understood to have their own role and responsibility within society. And all of the clans are understood to be a unique puzzle piece that completes the whole society. And so we went from being that caste system situation to this. And what was the crucible? What was the bridge? It was collapse. Collapse was our greatest teacher. And that's why sometimes I have hope in this very dismal situation, because I feel like through this collapse, we will learn hard lessons that apparently we're not learning from charts and graphs and other things. And we will learn that kindness and collaboration and women's leadership, frankly, allowing women to lead equally, if not maybe a little more sometimes, that we can find a more sustainable practice. So I guess all of that is to say that you know our food systems, which were abundant by many case studies prove this, they were not just magically so. They occurred through many trials and errors. And this is, one of the first laws of Dene philosophy is trial and erudition. That we understood this is a part of this world. We go through trials and we learn. That's a foundational tenet within Dene philosophy, according to my elders. And it's through that trial that we learn and we grow. And I think all of us here could say one of the most significant times in our lives was probably one of the most challenging, heart-wrenching times of our lives. That those crucibles when we're just down on the ground were the times that shaped us and made us who we are today, and the learning of standing back up. And I think that's what we're going to be doing in the coming decades, in the coming century, really. So we're going to go through some trials and we're going to learn, and we got to learn together. We got to stick together, and we got to resist the temptation to separate and divide, and lean into the medicine of forgiveness and the medicine of unity and the medicine of compassion in these times.
Thank you so much. I love this long-term perspective and what we learned. And as a student of China, that is so true there. They have a movement called ecological civilization. And I asked one of their leading people writing a book on it, how long do you think it will take to bring about ecological civilization? He said, at least 100 years. So the long-term thinking is really what we need. I love Craig Patterson put in the chat also where is it now? We are drowning in data while starving for wisdom. How true is that? That's E.O. Wilson. I know there's some questions in the chat, and maybe Mark Hathaway's written a few, and I think he might want to put one question in there. And I love that Melanie's just put in there the medicine of compassion to underscore what Lila June just said. But are there any others on the panel right now who want to give examples or make further comments on the hopeful signs or ways forward? Melanie, you're nodding your head.
Thanks. Yes, yeah, Mary Evelyn, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this gift you've just given us, Dr. Johnston, in terms of the medicine of compassion. And I think that that is one of the things that is a link between all of the religious traditions and all the spiritualities that are. We've talked a little bit, and Steve, you mentioned this about the necessity of building out a language, a common language, whereby we can work together, a kind of ethical frame that we can agree upon enough in order to stay together. And I suppose a question maybe for the panelists is, how do we stay with the discomfort? Are there things in religious, spiritual practices that enable us to stay with discomfort on our way towards the medicine of forgiveness? I'm thinking more specifically about African American Black Buddhism, for example, and a number of different conversations that are happening kind of inter-religiously, whereby you have many African Americans who have been shaped by the Christian tradition, often in the North American context, but at some point have a theological awakening and come into a deep sense of knowing about the importance of compassion as a value through Buddhist meditation. And that understanding of cultivating compassion in the heart creates a space for many people to be able to sit with the terror, to be able to sit with the paradox, to be able to sit with and essentially breathe through, for the sake of staying in communion with others, the difficulty. So I just wondered if that is in fact a step we're naming as a panel, that there is something sacred about this capacity to sit with the uncomfortable that leads us to this medicine of compassion.
I think that's hugely important, and there's so many meditation groups. Thich Nhat Hanh, of course, is doing all kinds of groups for climate activists and climate leaders. So I think what you're pointing to, Melanie and Lila June, is absolutely essential. The heart bringing that forward. There are some questions in the chat. So Miriam, if you have anything, or can we go to the questions? And Ursula, there's a question for you there too.
Okay, I got to leave in 10 minutes.
Yeah, got it. Okay, so the question for you was, how do we reconcile the suffering endemic in the natural world with our feelings of reverence and awe for the natural world? I'm sure you've had this before.
I mean, nature just is, okay? Nature just is. Nature evolves, comes forth, works with the stuff that originated the Big Bang, etc. It is. And some of what it is involves, for example, predation. Somebody mentioned this earlier. Animals do eat each other, and they eat plants, and plants are also living creatures. So if you don't eat animals, you're not pure if you really want to go through a deep dive in your affinity for the all of life. But that's what we've got. I mean, we don't have another planet or another universe. The way our planet works is something that I think we are called to deeply understand through scientific accounts. Watch Mary Evelyn's movies and her website and really get to see how it all works. And then and only then, to my mind, is compassion possible. You have compassion for that which you understand, for that which you have slept with and felt in your bones. And some of it isn't pretty, but we work with that as well.
That's wonderful. And I do think in terms of the world's religion, not to simplify this important question and to just add to what Ursula said, I mean, the death rebirth cycle is in all spiritualities around the world. And it's very fundamental to the point of symbolic consciousness that Ursula raised and so on. So it's how do we deal with death, rebirth, and so on, and especially at this time, as has been noted. I do want to,
We're grateful to. I'm grateful to to death. It's a very key part of what keeps the whole thing going, and it was invented, if you will, to perpetuate being multicellular, for example, which we all value as being a cool way to be a critter, is to be a multicellular one. So, yeah, death is part of it, and there it is.
yeah. And the whole evolutionary process has this complexity and creativity and destruction right at its heart. And we seem to think of it always as good and evil. It's something else, and we don't have the language for it. I think that's part of it. So there's a question in here. I just want to jump in myself, if you don't mind, that I think it's Eleanor O'Neill. She's saying, how do we address the issue of human exceptionalism woven through many religious traditions? Which is very true, but that's what we've been trying to do for 30 years, is showing that many of these traditions, especially in Asia, especially in the indigenous traditions, especially in the work that Melanie is doing too, in Confucianism and Taoism, it's not anthropocentric, it's cosmo-anthropocentric. And that's the term that Dui Ming and many others have used. So it's our Western traditions do happen to be rather anthropocentric, but exceptionalism, it's such an important question. I just wanted to highlight that. And it's why we did this new website of livingearthcommunity.com that is showing the profound interconnection of all life forms. And we are one, a self-reflective, perhaps, creature, but the sense of sentience throughout the various ecosystems is extremely important. And even Ursula, in her wonderful interview in The Journey of the Universe, talks about the qualities of a cell as having a self, letting things in through the membrane and so on. So I recommend that highly. Miriam, do you have anything you want to jump in on? Because I know a couple of you have to leave shortly.
Yeah, I really have to go. No,
Okay.
I live on an island and I have to take a boat, so
Have a good day, Ursula. So
Good
nice to meet
travel.
you.
way to organize it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ursula. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mary Evelyn. I wanted to make a reflection on one of the questions regarding in the framework of the Global Ethical Stocktake, but link it to what Steve Combs just shared about. He mentioned about compass, maps, and guides.
Yeah.
I think I heard, right? And the question was, what culture and spiritual traditions and practice teach us how to live in balance with nature? And when I was hearing Steve Holmes talk about compass, maps, guides, I thought every religious group or culture or spiritual traditions have different compasses and maps and guides, right? Instruments to show how we ought to live on this planet, give some guidance. And from an Earth Charter perspective, we have always, through the drafting consultation process and since the launch, also in the past 25 years, we have always been curious and interested to find the commonalities, the intersections between these different maps and traditions. So I wanted just to mention one thing with regards to the question, what culture and spiritual traditions teach us how to live in balance with nature. I think that many cultural traditions, religious, spiritual traditions emphasize the notion of living in harmony with nature. In fact, in 2012, for the Rio Plus 20, we put together for UNESCO a book, by the way, that was edited by Rick Klux, on the voices of different religious traditions, linking with the Earth Charter and sustainability. And living in harmony with nature and this notion of interdependence was found in all these different compasses, maps, guides. And for example, they mainly mention the practice of honor the land, show gratitude, and recognizing this deep sense of interdependence with all living beings. So these we can find in different spiritual traditions, religious groups, but all interfaith groups, but also indigenous traditions. And again, we could see that also emerging through the drafting consultation process of the Earth Charter, and can now see through the ongoing movement that we're dealing with people from all regions. When I deal with people from all regions of the world every day, and I can see this commonality, in the approach of living harmony with nature, the sense of gratitude and interdependence reflected in different religious or spiritual groups. And also that's probably why it's also reflected in the Earth Charter. No? So I just wanted to point that we can find it in different religious books and compasses, and also in the Earth Charter, this importance to cultivate this sense of living with gratitude and with a sense of interdependence. If I may just take one more minute to maybe share what I think is unique about the Earth Charter as a compass or as a map for this process. One has to do with the way in which it was put together through a broad, participatory, multicultural, multi-sectoral process involving the voices of scientists, experts in international environmental law, different interfaith groups, theologians, indigenous people. So it's broad and multicultural in its making, in terms of its process, precisely to find the intersections between new science, spirituality, indigenous worldviews, international law, and the voices of different people from civil societies, from cultures around the world. So I think that's an important point to emphasize. And then second, its content. Very broad, comprehensive, and inclusive, building on this notion of being inclusive, but above all, moving beyond the human-centric approach, as some people were saying here, and embracing this more eco or life-centric perspective of life. So, because for the more than 2 decades, the Earth Charter has been emphasizing this linkage between peace and security with ecological integrity, social justice, in a very eloquent way or manner. And what I find very interesting is that as a compass, despite this rich diversity of contributions, the Earth Charter remains non-partisan and non-religious document. So in kind of grounding what we can find as our shared ethical values, in the collective thinking of people who are searching for how we can build an ecological civilization, how we can envision and build a narrative towards a more just, sustainable, and peaceful world. So Steve, we do need maps, and I think we can find commonalities and intersection among all of them, and certainly the Earth Charter is one example of how it can be reflected. Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Wonderful, excellent. And I just see Kevin Cawley, who is with the Thomas Berry Forum at Iona College and an observer at the UN with his own order. And he's making a very important point, of course, that compassionate moral compass makers are needed, because the projection of 2.8 C, if we're on the same track, is certainly on the horizon in a very worrisome way. So, Kevin, thank you for that very important intervention. I would love, I think we're going to, in a few more minutes, to kind of wrap up and have Karena do some concluding comments and so on. There's some wonderful comments in the chat, and someone made the good suggestion, can we have some of those resources later? So I'm hoping that Ned Joyner and the wonderful Center for Earth Ethics, which is hosting this, might be able to send out some of those resources afterwards, which would be really great. And of course, the links to all of your work, which are just superb and very inspiring, each one of you. So any other final comments? Steve, Lila June, you've been making great comments in the chat. Steve, anything from you before we wrap up?
I guess I would just say I've had the opportunity to work on various federal and state or religious panels on different environmental issues, and uh, I've come to realize over the years that it's really important to recognize that it is the privilege to ask the questions in a discussion that matter, that being asked to provide an answer is very, very limited. But in discussions like this, being privileged to ask questions, which you're facilitating through the chat, that's what is really crucial and empowering.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Steve. That's so true. Lila June, anything else? As I say, you've been wonderful comments there in the chat.
Well, I just want to appreciate everyone here, not only the panelists, but the participants as well. And I want to encourage us to continue to pray, to be used as instruments for healing. And I think that's all we're being asked to do right now, is to ask the Creator to please use us to be of service to healing, and to, as someone so beautifully said in the chat, to protect life, and to protect the most vulnerable, and to be warriors for life, and to be warriors for love, and to be warriors for each other. And I just want to encourage each of us to take heart in these times. And yes, it is hard, but what an honor to be alive right now. What an honor to serve in this battle, between what is far from Creator, what is close to Creator. And to me, Creator is love, and love is Creator. And what a joy it is that we get to be here, and to try to be of service. And even just trying is a win. It's a win, to just get up in the morning and try. And that's what the elders told me. They said, we're not asking you to be perfect. We're just asking you to try. And that has liberated me to not be afraid of failure, and to simply wake up in the morning and to pray, to be of service, to make the offerings in the morning of whatever it is you offer. Maybe it's tobacco, maybe it's cornmeal, maybe it's watermelon. I don't know what it could be, but to make those offerings in the morning and ask to be an instrument. And as my mother says, to pray and then duck, because those prayers get answered quick. Or as I say, pray and then hold on, because then Creator's gonna take you on a journey of service and a journey of beauty. And to know that even the craziest of us, and the most broken of us, are worthy to fight and to serve. And I'm proof of that, because I'm very broken and very crazy. And I have made more mistakes than I care to remember some days. But somehow Creator still wants me. Creator still believes in me, and wants and has that grace, that unconditional love, to welcome me back into the army of love, and say, look, you're broken, you made mistakes, but hey, we still got a place for you. We still got a job for you. We got a role for you. And what a joy to be a part of that army with all of you. And you are the people who give me hope, and who make me believe that it's worth it to stand up and keep walking forward. And so I'm just honored to be a part of that with all of you.
Thank you so much. What a tremendous capstone, epilogue, and actually moving forward. That's so beautiful. And I am also immensely grateful to each one of you. I wish we could sit down and have tea together, a little meal together, and one day we will. But thank you, all of you on this panel. And Corinna, I'm going to call on you for some comments, but thank you to the Center for Earth Ethics and all the staff here, Samira, Clara, Ned, for your great work, and for the participants and your terrific questions. So Corinna, over to you. Any concluding comments?
Oh, thank you so much, Mary Evelyn, and to everybody for this extraordinary dialogue. I have found it so rich and deep, and will take a little while to process, but I did want to reflect back some of what really moved me about it. And I would say first and foremost, just the validation and accentuation of the importance of an ethical lens
Yeah.
on this climate crisis, on this particular issue of the global environment. That we heard from Miriam, from her extensive experience in that groundbreaking work of Earth Charter, about just the lack of literacy and the lack of, for no fault of anyone's, but really lack of experience and literacy and understanding of what the field that has to do with responsibilities and relationships and moral obligations and the role of community and culture and belonging and worldviews, that not everyone understands that. And to have a sustained ethical lens is very important. Steve Combs mentioned that the scientific method itself, while very useful, very powerful, doesn't give us that compass, doesn't give us that map. And so we need to understand what it does and what it doesn't do. And I think that's a really good contribution to the conversation about why we may be stuck in the COP process. And Lila, of course, in mentioning that in her beautiful example, in particular with the clam gardens, but in a lot of different native food systems, it's not just how we do things, it's why. It's the underlying why. And so what she said is, if we handed this exact thing to a system that valued short-term profits, it wouldn't last. But because the why of the clam gardens was the long-term health of the community of life, that itself, that value is what sustained it. So the importance of the ethical lens itself is the first thing I wanted to lift up. The second thing is a little bit about what that reveals, that ethical lens. And I feel that some of what was said starts to demonstrate, when Melanie spoke about the relational ethic, the way of being that comes out of womanist theology, and particularly this notion also that we have to dismantle something here. We have to dismantle the domination. And in order to do that, to look and center the voices of those who've really borne the brunt of it the most, and have that experience, to center experience. And of course, that is Black women, and it is the others that she has brought to the fore, that also can do that. I really think that that's a wonderful recommendation for COP30, to center experience in that way. That, we've often heard in movement spaces that the most impacted communities should lead the movement. But what is the reason for that? It's because it centers the actual experience in a way that I think Melanie articulated for us very powerfully, that relational ethic and way of being. And then I wanted to say also that that what Ursula said about what this reveals, this ethical lens, I think it's interesting to note how much she spoke about nature itself, in quoting Aristotle, that actually, where do our values come from? Our nature. We are fitted by our nature, who we are as human beings, to receive values. It's actually not something that's a big imposition from somewhere else. Um, and and that, those, what are those values? Well, she mentioned reverence, gratitude, and humility. Um, and then so I wanted to say, ethical lens, what this reveals, and then also I think it's notable that it was mentioned more than once about what is it we're up against. We have to understand that it's not only that we have to be better, it's that there's some really strong force in the way. There are actually obstacles, and we need to really identify them. And that was said, Lila put it as the oppression of powerful corporations that have PR and marketing and lobbying and money, that every single day there is a headwind that we face in that. Miriam talked about the powerful interests that are holding it back. And she actually referenced that came up in these many dialogues that have been sparked by the Earth Charter community that she's a part of, that many people have brought that up. And Steve Combs talked about it as well when he talked about now they're even attacking empathy. That, normally it was attacking the science itself, not so much the compass holders and the map makers, which are the ethicists. I think you did a beautiful job explaining the distinction there. But now the attacks are coming. Also on even the notion of empathy, in addition to the attacks on science. So to identify those obstacles is really important, I think. And then finally I wanted to say that, we had this real, I think, recognition of the way in which there's a sort of ethos of people that have been called to this conversation or in this conversation. It's in no way exclusive, it's expansive, but that there are elements that draw from spirituality, that draw from faith and wisdom traditions, that actually have the skills that are helpful here. And that includes the what was lifted, by Melanie, of something Lila said of the medicine of compassion, and the medicine of forgiveness. And then also what was said about by Melanie about living with sitting with the discomfort. A lot of times that's not what is really given time and space for in negotiations or in political discussions. The long-term thinking is, as Mary Evelyn was saying, and then as Marian said, that living in that all these faith and wisdom traditions have this teachings about living in harmony with nature. And Lila ending with that sense, that calling, and that sense of what an honor it is to be alive and Creator using us. I think, I mean, I know I speak for more than only myself in saying there's something that happens to you when you get lifted, your spirits get lifted. And it is possible for us to try to actually expand and offer that feeling to more people through this process, which a lot of people are very cynical about now. And so these are the four sets of things I wanted to lift up, and I want to say that I think we have some very strong recommendations out of that. I mentioned a few. I think we'll be very curious to hear from people, because we can send a list of specific recommendations. I would say one of the things that's on my mind is to not only validate this importance of the ethical lens, but to actually ask that it be extended, to ask that this be a launch of sorts, and that those of us who really want to hold this conversation and expand this conversation be given that. What Lila has mentioned is that that honor to be in this together and to extend it to more people. So I want to thank, of course, all of these extraordinary speakers, all of the communities that they represent, both ancestrally and families, but also organizations and convenings, movements that are coming together here. You thank you, Mary Evelyn, for thanking the Center for Earth Ethics. And I echo that and thanking my colleagues. Thank you, Mary Evelyn Tucker, for sponsoring this, for co-hosting this, for pulling it together, for moderating it, for everything that you have done for this movement. For many of us in personal ways, it's really a great honor to be working with you. And I know that we'll be continuing this conversation. And finally, I want to say thank you to the COP30 team in Brazil. To, in particular, Minister Marina Silva and those that have really been working very hard to make this global ethical stocktake a reality. I think it is what we make of it. They really, I think, can use a lot of our support in carrying this through. And I wanted to lift a quote from her where she was, this actually kind of syncs up with how we closed with Lila's comments, and she said, "May this ethical review be and all of us be a kind of prayer for the world to commit to protecting life and the conditions in which it was created. It's a big calling. I say thank you so much to all, and back to you, Mary Evelyn, for any final words.
Thank you for that beautiful summary. Really appreciate it. And Danielle, Julianne has put a wonderful quote of Thomas Berry into the chat that I will also share. We are supported by the same power that spun the galaxies into space. How marvelously cosmological is this Thomas Berry, but also ecological. And I wanted to just conclude with some of the work that we've been doing for many years that relates to a series of R's, which are ethical R's, if you will, that relate directly to COP as to what the religious, spiritual, ethical communities can contribute that are essential to this change of consciousness and conscience. The first is reverence, shared wonder and awe of Earth and ecosystems, respect for the profound interdependencies of all life, responsibility to future generations of the whole Earth community. So reverence, respect, responsibility. And then restraint in the use of fossil fuels, in consumption, in contributing to divestment, redistribution, climate justice, who is suffering the most, the refugee, the call of the refugees, reparation, paying for loss and damage from climate disasters and for adaptation and mitigation. So restraint, redistribution, reparations. And finally, restoration. This is so important. How will we restore our forests, our rivers, our ability of salmon to go upstream again as we de-dam? So restoration processes that traditional environmental people have also been leading the way on. And renewal. I think all of this is about renewal of the human spirit, the mind, heart, the embodiedness, the praxis that will give us the energy, the human energy for the transforming energy for the future of our planet. I thank you all so much. What a joy to be with you. And let's continue on the path together. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye for now.